we now know how much and where we need to invest, these figures are a drop in the ocean compared to the dividend expected and the funds available.
264 billion is minuscule in the face of the cost of the thousands of dead mothers, the cost of the hundreds of thousands of orphaned children.
And for more on this, Nick Harper joins us now from New York. Hi, Nick. Good to see you again. Now, delegates at this UN conference have been presented with some very sobering statistics. Just how bad is the problem surrounding maternal deaths and violence against women?
Yeah, some very sobering statistics looking particularly at those topics. The UN says that 1 in 3 women experience violence, either physical or sexual, at some point during their lifetime. They say that there are 12 million child marriages every single year, and they say that 800 women die each day from preventable causes when it comes to giving birth. On top of that, they also detailed the fact that 230 million women around the world lack access to modern contraception. All of those things are combined are the main topics that they're looking at. Really, how they can try and resolve some of the issues that women face, everything from violence to access to contraception. It's something that it's very difficult for them to deal with, especially when they're looking at it from such a global perspective. We've got about 160 countries taking part in this, but the UN really trying to hammer home the message that there are many millions of women who need some very urgent help.
Now, the UN Population Fund has published quite an extensive report into what needs to be done. What are they calling for?
Well, as is so often the case when it comes down to the United Nations, it's really all about money. They are saying that many of these programs that could help women are simply underfunded. That's why they've come up with that figure, the $264 billion that would be needed around the world to fund all of these programs, to help all of these women. So to break it down, we've got the $115 billion that would go towards preventing maternal deaths, the $35 billion that would help to end child marriage. That would work out at about $600 per child, and they're saying that all of that money could be used in a variety of ways, everything from treatment to training to outreach programs in individual communities, but also doing simple things like buying medicine and contraception. They are saying that it's a big figure, but they're saying that inaction would cost much, much more.
What sort of commitments have countries made so far?
Well, the commitments are along 3 very broad topics, really trying to end some of these practices over the next 10 years, giving themselves the deadline of 2030. That's the Sustainable Development Goals deadline for a whole range of different subjects that the UN is looking at. But as far as these commitments go, they're trying to give women access to family planning during the course of the next 10 years, to end preventable maternal deaths, and also to end gender-based violence, both sexual and physical, and also end some of those harmful practices against women and girls, in particular female genital mutilation. And they're giving themselves that target of 10 years. Those are the commitments in terms of the targets they want to achieve, but of course they now need the commitments in terms of funding, and that's why they want those countries, some 160, 170 that are taking part, to come up with the money to hit that 264 billion total.
But the summit in Nairobi does have its critics. Who's opposing it and why?
It has, yeah. We've seen quite a few people speaking out about this. We've had some governments around the world, but also religious groups around the world. Some Muslim groups, some Christian groups speaking out about the fact that what's being looked at by the UN goes against some African practices, but also against some religious practices. In particular, we heard from the chairman of Kenya's Catholic Church bishops. He said that the summit would lead to immorality, that it was against those African practices. So it's largely the religious groups that are saying that the practices that are in place need to stay in place. They're not something that should be ended. And they're talking in particular about things like child marriage and female genital mutilation. But of course, the UN are saying that those are outdated practices that need to end, and end as soon as possible.
Okay, Nick Harper, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for updating us from New York.